Jen. Jen's childhood was characterized by emotional neglect and the lack of safety. Her emotional needs were not recognized or prioritized by the adults in her life, particularly her parents, who were absent much of the time. Within the wider family context, boundaries were blurred and inappropriate dynamics were normalized. For example, family members introduced her to drugs and alcohol around the age of 13. Throughout secondary school, Jen was bullied, but staff did little to help despite her obvious distress. On the contrary, they contributed to her victimization. Much of the bullying stemmed from an incident in a first year in which a teacher refused to allow Jen to use the toilet, resulting in Jen wetting herself and being made to stay in the soiled clothes for the rest of the day. The teacher faced no repercussions. Jen began self-harming and running away from home, and the only adult she felt she could confide in committed suicide around this time. Into adolescence, Jen had no stable sense of self-worth and no adults who consistently protected or advocated for her. Her self-harm worsened and she experienced suicidal thoughts, yet safeguarding responses remained absent. Jen began to believe that she was not worth protecting and as a result became increasingly vulnerable to exploitation. At 13, adult men began contacting her online, giving her a sense of validation and belonging. Sexual conversations were common, including one man encouraging Jen to insert a knife into her vagina. At 15, offline grooming began with a group of white British men who presented themselves as sympathetic friends to the vulnerable Jen. Though she was not raped by these men, one told her that touching was okay, but we can't have intercourse until you are 16 because of the law. At the age of 17, Jen was introduced to a gang of Iraqi Kurdish Muslim men by a friend who she now believes was herself groomed. The gang members, all of whom were illegal migrants, trafficked Jen to numerous towns and cities across the Midlands, where she was raped by multiple men at what were described as parties. On one occasion, she was anally raped in a park by one of the gang members. She was taken on drug runs and witnessed the slaughtering of a lamb in the bathroom of a house. She describes a closed and intimidating social world governed by fear, loyalty, and silence, in which racially supremacist attitudes were openly and regularly expressed. White British people were described as white trash and white girls as English pig dogs. Perpetrators insisted that children choose exploitation, and Britain and its institutions were described as soft and easy to exploit. They boasted of receiving free money from the British state, and on multiple occasions Jen was forced to fill in asylum benefit applications on their behalf. Jen witnessed intimidation, violence, trafficking, asylum fraud, sexual exploitation, including the drugging and raping of children as young as 13, and the aftermath of a gang-related murder while involved with the group, and was thus afraid to defy or disclose against members. The gang became increasingly controlling and abusive, isolating Jen from her friends and family. Her movements, communications, and decisions were closely monitored and restricted, and any attempt to assert independence was met with threats. She suffered emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse, and at 18 became pregnant as a result of rape. Jen was repeatedly told she was inferior and unclean as a non-Muslim. Religious coercion escalated into forced conversion to Islam, partly due to her pregnancy. She was taken to a dark, dingy flat that had been converted into a mosque and married by an imam in an Islamic ceremony without giving consent. The marriage was used as a mechanism to legitimize control over her, and restrictions on her behavior increased. During pregnancy, the threats intensified. Jen was told she had no right to leave or make decisions about her child because to do so would be anti-Islamic. Her behavior was tightly controlled, including an instruction not to eat pork as the father believed it would make the baby gay. She was told that disclosure to the authorities would result in shame and punishment. Nevertheless, she attempted to report her situation to the police, but no action was taken. The ideological and religious dimensions of her trafficking and abuse were minimized, and her disclosure were reframed as relationship issues or cultural matters before being dismissed as exaggerated or unreliable. After the birth of her daughter, Jen's access to a child was restricted and used as a means of leverage. The father, an Iraqi illegal migrant, repeatedly took their daughter to Iraq despite having claimed asylum in Britain on the basis that he could not safely remain there. While there, she was exposed to firearms, including AK-47s. When the daughter was 3 years old, Jen contacted the police after the father threatened to take the daughter to Iraq and never bring her back. The police responded that it was a civil matter and did not intervene. Jen has not spent a single one of her daughter's birthdays with her since she was 9 years old and has had minimal contact with her for several years. Her father continues to take her to Iraq regularly. Jen now lives with complex PTSD, anxiety, depression, dissociation, periods of agoraphobia, and persistent fear and distress in relation to her daughter's safety and autonomy. These difficulties significantly impair her ability to function day to day. She gives evidence so that religiously motivated, coercive abuse is properly recognized and confronted, even when doing so is politically, culturally, or socially controversial. Jen, they have no compassion for the young girls that are out on the streets, and they see us as slags, as white trash. English pig dogs came up a lot. Muslims don't like pigs, and they don't like dogs, so they hate dogs and they hate pigs, and they put women on the same level as that.